Hello everybody and welcome to Insider's Guide. Today we're discussing one of the more logistically challenging resorts in Colorado, Steamboat. Despite its far location relative to the I-70 corridor resorts, Steamboat is absolutely worth a visit, the reasons for which we'll delve into in all 4 parts of this Insider's Guide. In this part of the guide, we're discussing the Storm Peak area of the mountain. If you haven't already, however, go check out part A before this to get some background on Steamboat and learn about the out-of-base logistics. With that, let's continue in Insider's Guide to Ski Resorts, Steamboat. Now, a first thing to consider with this Storm Peak side of the mountain is that the other side of the mountain, Sunshine Peak, doesn't open until 9, so if you head up the gondola at 8:30, you'll be sent over to this side. If you want to go to Sunshine, I would recommend hitting a lap or 2 on Burgess Creek before heading that way when it opens. As such, let's start by discussing Burgess Creek. When coming off the Steamboat Gondola or Thunderhead chairlift, your easiest access to this entire side of the mountain will be the ultra-wide but steep Rudy's Run groomer. If you want to lap Why Not without doing its full exhausting length, you can do it via So What, the Burgess Creek chairlift, and Arc. From Rudy's, you'll most naturally filter onto Lightning, which, just like Rudy's, is a wide but steep groomer. Blizzard isn't groomed as often, but also doesn't develop moguls and tends to be a bit less busy than Lightning. Norther, the uppermost section of which cannot be accessed from Thunderhead, often has small moguls, which is perfect for learning. BC Liftline and Wideout are both standard black mogul runs, and while they're not the longest in the world, they certainly are longer than this trail map makes it seem. If you head down Velvet or Skyline from the top of Burgess Creek or Elkhead, you can access Park Lane, which is a green road that takes you to Why Not or Lower Rainbow. Lower Rainbow is a wide, steep, popular groomer. It sits in a gully and thus sits in shadow for a lot of the day. This means it often gets quite icy. I much prefer Rudy's to Lightning. Lower down, everything merges together onto Ego. This area is quite busy, and with people wanting to go to 5 different places, it can get quite chaotic. Be very careful in this area. The runout from the bottom of this area is the BC Skiway. I know some find it flat in certain sections, but I actually find it quite nice. It's at that right pitch that you can just point the ski straight ahead, not have to turn or really do anything at all, and just relax and enjoy your little jaunt through the forest. From BC, you'll have access to Pony Express, which we'll discuss in Part D, and Thunderhead in the base area, which we discussed in Part A. Down at the bottom of Ego is the Storm Peak Express lift. This lift can get fairly busy, but is augmented by the painful 4 Points and Burgess Creek triple chairs. From the point of convergence of all of these trails at the top of Ego, you can eyeball the line for all 3 lifts and decide where to go based on that. If you decide to go to Storm Peak, the maze on the far side, Looker's Left here, is typically much shorter of a wait. 4 Points serves about 2/3 of the vert of Storm Peak, giving access to some of the best mogul runs on the mountain. From 4 Points you can also access Sunset, which is sometimes groomed. Sunset will drop you off with a decision to either continue to the Sundown lift via Lights Out, or head back towards the Storm Peak side via the Duster Catwalk. Dusk is a short little groomer cut that takes you to the main attraction of the 4 Points pod, Rainbow. Rainbow is a beautiful cruiser going right down the ridgeline with fantastic views across the valley. Upper Rainbow is my personal favorite groomer at Steamboat, although I'm not a huge fan of the lower part due to the aforementioned reasons. The 4 Points triple itself actually gets some decent lines, so when taking multiple laps in the Storm Peak pod, I recommend just biting the bullet and waiting in the Storm Peak line, and then exclusively using Bar UE from there on out. Bar UE is a double chair, and while it is quite long, it absolutely hauls as far as double chairs go, so it's not a terribly long ride. 4 Points is exactly the opposite, as while it's long, it's excruciatingly slow as well. At the top of 4 Points is the 4 Points Lodge, which is another popular but good spot to grab a bite or beer midday. If you exit left and then stick as far right as possible, you can access Meadow Lane and Cyclone, which are both typically groomed. Meadow Lane is just a road, but for intermediates looking to avoid the Storm Peak lines, 4 Points to Meadow Lane to Bar UE is your best option in this area. Cyclone often is only half or 2/3 groomed, so if someone in your party wants bumps, they can satisfy themselves on the skier's right side of this short, wide, and decently steep trail. This is the other way to get to Bar UE from 4 Points. Everything else here, these single blacks from Typhoon to Pressure Drop, are almost always bumped up. They're nice because you get a nice long ride back up to 4 Points to rest, but then again, they're also bad for that exact reason. Twister has a couple of slight bends, but nothing super major. Overall, it's a pretty standard black mogul pod with nothing much else to add. From the Storm Peak and Bar UE summit, you can take Highline, which is a very flat catwalk that takes you over to the Sundown side. This is primarily just useful to hit the Closets and Shadows tree skiing, because if you want to go all the way over to Sundown, You can do it more easily by taking sunset to moonlight. The uppermost part of the Storm Peak terrain is dominated by this big open face, Storm Peak North and Storm Peak South. They're separated by a very sparse set of trees, so you can easily ski between them, so I generally treat it as one area. It's a super nice wide area to get some turns in when there's fresh snow, but a few days after a storm, since it's a super popular area, it can also get moguled up. I have also seen them groom the south side, but I'm not sure how common this is. On the edges of the Storm Peak face, you've got Triangle 3 and Sideburn, which are both pretty non-committal glade areas. Triangle 3 in particular is thinned pretty well and makes for some solid first trees for advanced intermediates. If you continue down to the trees between all the 4 points blacks, there are some fun hidden rock drops you can find. By far the most popular run in the Storm Peak pod is Buddy's Run. Buddy's Run is the signature groomer in the pod and can get quite busy. On storm days, this leads to big moguls by the end of the day, or on normal days leads to it becoming quite icy. Big Meadow is not an alternative as it's almost always left ungroomed. The same can be said for Skeeters. Big Meadow, as indicated by its blue rating, is very mellow and a good place for lower level off-piste. It does, however, drop you onto Flying Z Gulch, which typically has moguls, although it's not crazy steep. Flying Z is a steeper mogul run, while Bugs is more of a tree run. Off of Upper Buddies, you can hop onto Calf Roper, which is a road to the 4 Points Lodge for those who aren't keen on hitting the moguls or off-piste of Storm Peak North. Finally, down at Bar UE, you've got a couple of options to get down. Vortex is a very standard black mogul run, although because it's a major funnel and is lower down, it can get pretty sketchy snow conditions. Dropout is almost always groomed and is typically the iciest run on the mountain. For once ever, I'm actually going to say that I prefer the road, Tornado Lane in this case. It's only a road for its first half before it opens up and turns into a standard blue cruiser. And finally, we get to the bane of my existence, Morningside. First and foremost, Morningside gets absolutely swamped, let me make that clear. Absolutely do not go to Morningside on a powder day if you can help it. For some reason, it's super popular, but I'll be honest, I don't find it to be all that. There's a couple of open faces, some sparse trees, and I know some people describe it as a bowl, but it's honestly not even a true bowl. And on top of all that, it's an extremely short run. They groom the run out at the bottom and will only sometimes groom Cowboy Coffee and nothing else. The only purpose of Morningside is to access everything from Chute 1 to East Face. Otherwise, I'd highly advise skipping it. You can access Morningside from the top of Storm Peak and Bar UE or Sundial over in the Sunshine Pod. The maze for Morningside is on the looker's left side of this lift, so if you're coming down Snooze Bar, you may have to traverse around a bit. One last thing to keep in mind is that both Cheesy Grits and Frying Pan are marked as black on the trail map, but are blue in person. They have the pitch of a blue, but are both ungroomed, so I'd probably call them Steamboat Blue Blacks. Alright, that seems to sufficiently wrap up the Burgess Creek, Storm Peak, and Morningside parts of the mountain. Go check out parts A, B, and D now, all about the rest of the mountain. As always, please leave any questions down below. Thank you all so much for watching. All my love, I'm out.